Thank you, Rabbi Eddie. Thank you, Cantor Robin. Thank you, everybody, for coming here tonight. Ian, congratulations. Congratulations to you, too. I'm going to talk a little bit today about two very important occasions that are in the calendar that are not traditionally part of the Jewish calendar, but I'm going to argue today that they should be. And these are the holidays of Juneteenth and Pride. But first, a story. So a long, long time ago, a monastery in the woods had fallen upon hard times. Once, a long, long time before that, it was an amazingly great order with hundreds and hundreds of monks that would come from far and wide to worship. But now, it had been reduced to a tiny handful of monks, all well into their 70s. The order was dying. Now, deep in the forests surrounding the monastery, there was a small hut. And in this hut, there lived a very mystical, magical rabbi, whose name was Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. And he had a good relationship with the monks, and they always liked the fact that there was a rabbi there living in the woods nearby, and they could always sort of feel his energy moving around. And after a while, one of the monks decided that he was going to go and he was going to talk to this rabbi and ask his advice for their order, which had fallen on such hard times. And so this particular monk, packed up some provisions and walked out into the forest to the hut of this Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem to ask for advice. When he came, he knocked on the door, and he was welcomed in by the rabbi. Even though he was from a different religion, the rabbi was fine with that. The rabbi was happy to welcome him into his hut. And they talked for a little while and exchanged pleasantries, and finally the monk got down to his question. He said, "The purpose of my visit, I'm really here for a reason, is that once a long, long time ago, our monastery was an amazingly huge order, and we had so many people, and now we have just a handful of monks, and we're all in our 70s, and I'm afraid that our order is going to die. So what should we do? Do you have any advice for us?" And the rabbi said, "Oy, I know, it's the same thing in the Jewish community. The spirit seems to have gone out of people. In the town where I came from, they can hardly get a minyan anymore. Almost no one comes to synagogue anymore." And so they spent the day talking about the plight of religion and spirituality in the world and how difficult it was. And after a while, they got into very, very deep topics. And finally, as he was about to leave, he said, "Is there any advice you can give me? Anything at all to help me save my dying order?" And the rabbi sighed, and he said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you. But I can tell you this one thing. The other night, I was sleeping, and I had a dream. And in the dream, there was a vision that came to me about your monastery. And in the vision, I realized that the Messiah was among you. The Messiah was one of you." And he was startled, but he didn't quite know how to react. And so he took this news to heart, and he went back to his monastery, and they asked him, "So what did the rabbi say? What did he say?" He said, "Well, he said he couldn't help, but we just sat and talked for a while. But then as I was leaving, he said that the Messiah was one of us. Do you know what he means? I can't understand what he might mean by that." And the news circulated among this handful of monks that the Messiah was one of them. And in the days and the weeks to follow, the old monks all contemplated, like, who could it be? Who's the Messiah? Well, they thought, well, maybe it's the head of our order, Father Abbot, because, he's the leader. He's the leader of our generation, and he always has such wisdom to say. But then on the other hand, maybe it's Brother Thomas. He's a man of light and joy and happiness. Maybe that's why. Maybe he's the Messiah. And then they thought, well, it definitely can't be Brother Eldred, because Brother Eldred, he's crotchety, he's not a very nice person, he's sort of angry, he's sort of a nuisance. But you know what? Come to think of it, he always had a valid point to make. And even though he was sort of judgmental of us, he was always right. So maybe it was Brother Eldred. And then they thought, well, maybe Brother Philip, he's so passive, he never speaks. But you know what? Brother Philip, he's always there when you need him to hold your hand and be with you, especially when you're in trouble. And so maybe Brother Philip is the Messiah. And then this priest, this monk said to himself, there's no way I could be the Messiah. I'm just an ordinary person. But then he thought, well, what if I am the Messiah? Couldn't mean me. Oh, maybe it is me. And as they all reflected this way, the monks began to treat each other with extraordinary respect on the off chance that one of them might be the Messiah. And because the forest was so beautiful, people still occasionally came to visit the monastery, to picnic on its tiny lawn and to walk along its paths and to sit quietly in the chapel. And as they did so, without even being conscious of it, they sensed this aura of extraordinary respect which seemed to surround the elderly monks and which permeated the whole atmosphere of the whole place. There was something compelling and empowering about it. Without knowing exactly why, people began to come back to the monastery day after day to frequently visit and to play and to pray. And then they began to bring friends to this special place, and their friends brought friends. And in time, some of the younger men who came to visit began to talk more and more with the elderly monks. And after a while, some of them asked if they could join the order. And one after another asked to join. And soon the monastery was once again a thriving order, housing many, many people, welcoming many, many people, thanks to the rabbi's gift. They had become a beacon of peace, love, and hope for many, many people. So why do I tell this story? Perhaps it could be summed up in the words of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who said, "How many disasters do we have to go through in order to realize that all of humanity has a stake in the liberty of one person? Whenever one person is offended, we are all hurt. What begins as inequality of some inevitably ends as inequality of all." And I would add to Rabbi Heschel's words, and I would say, we have a stake in the joy and happiness of all. So this brings me to the question, why should we add Juneteenth and Pride to our year cycle of festivals that we observe in Judaism? And it brings me to the question of, what are we doing here? Right? What's the purpose of Judaism? And to me, the purpose of Judaism is that we should be serving a purpose, right? So for example, everything we do should be for a purpose. Like Ian's bar mitzvah, right? There's a purpose, right? You're stepping up into leadership in the community. You're moving from a self-centered life to a mitzvah-centered life, right? You're becoming a person of responsibility in our community. That's the purpose of that ceremony, or maybe one purpose. Maybe arguably there are other purposes, right? Or the two of you are getting married, right? There's a purpose to the ceremony that you're going through. It's to bring you together and create a bond and hopefully create a family that will bring love and joy and happiness to the world, right? And all of these things that we do in Judaism, they all serve an overarching purpose. And that overarching purpose comes from the story of Hillel, right? Hillel was once asked what Judaism was while standing on one foot, and if he could, the person would convert to Judaism. And he said, "That which is hurtful to you, don't do to your neighbor. The rest is commentary. Now go and study." And I would add to that, and I would say that the overall purpose of Judaism is to increase joy in the world and decrease suffering and despair for people. And that's it. And as Cantor Robin teaches our 7th graders, the Torah is, do you remember what she said the Torah is? The Torah is a guide for living. Yes, a guide for living, right? So a guide for living, it's not just for living like how to stay alive. It's a guide for living a good, wholesome, happy, joyful life where you bring happiness and joy to other people. So why should Juneteenth and Pride be celebrated by Jews? Well, Juneteenth, a celebration commemorating the end of slavery, and Pride, the celebration of the rights and freedoms for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people, both serve that purpose, right? To bring joy and happiness to the world, to reduce suffering for people. In Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the ancestors, it says, "Keep your eye on 3 things, and you will not come to miss the mark. Know from where you came, know where you're going, and before whom you are destined to give an accounting and a reckoning." History, destiny, accountability. As Professor Carlos Hill, a professor of African American Studies at the University of Oklahoma, reminds us, a Juneteenth holiday is just the impetus and enabler of the change that we want to see. The process of creating this holiday, the change that would never need to occur to get people's minds and spirits in the right place, is really what we want. And I would add to Dr. Hill's words to say that the process of making Juneteenth and Pride part of the yearly cycle of Jewish holidays would put the Jewish people more in line with our charge to be a mamlechet kohanim, a nation of priests whose job it is to affirm the holiness of all people. For in the words of the great Sephardic Jewish poet Emil Lazarus, "Until we are all free, we are none of us free." So I want to end with a blessing. This Juneteenth, and for all future Juneteenths, let us as Jews hold this observance to reinforce the idea for ourselves and our children that Black lives matter. This Pride Month, and for all future Pride Months, let us Jews remember to observe Pride, to reinforce the idea for ourselves and our children that LGBTQ lives matter. May we do this through creating opportunities for and participating in learning, ritual, and action in honor of Juneteenth and Pride. And may we continue to expand ourselves and our Judaism so that it works for the freedom of all, regardless of race, gender, or sexual orientation. Shabbat Shalom.